Evolution MX is a fully integrated account system for the construction industry. What we're going to look at during this session is the invoice register, with particular focus this time on the subcontractor side of things. The invoice register is something that's evolved in the last few years through technological advances. It means we can replace the need for maintaining hard copies of invoices. Instead, you monitor an email address, and your suppliers and subcontractors send invoices to a dedicated email address that's then picked up by the system and allow you to process it without the need for anybody to have to print anything, stick any barcode labels on it, or do any scanning, or ultimately any filing or shredding. The invoice register we'll look at primarily this morning is sitting within the subcontractors ledger. So we get it there as a submenu option. You have the option of using traditional menu access to be able to get hold of the entries that are requiring processing, or you can use your own choice of dashboards. This is an example of what you might want to have. Now, dashboards are a feature of Evolution MX generally. We have separate sessions of recorded webinars which look at the dashboard functionality in more detail. This is just showing you how you can use it to present some statistical information, but also to use it as a processing prompt, if you like. So I've got an indication there top left to say that there's a single item that's come in on an email address that's waiting to be processed. So what I'll do first of all, let me just send myself an email address so that we can start processing something in a bit more detail. So I'll just go to a little local email client I've got, fire that up just so it doesn't interfere with my normal emails. It's up to you whether you use a separate email address for the subcontractors and a different one for the purchase ledger, or whether you use the same one. That's part of the configuration or the setup, that choice, because it may well be you've got different people looking after the different functions, or maybe it's the same person doing both. So I'm just going to send myself an email address, an email to this address, just so I can identify what it is. Let's say it's Tuesday subcontractors, and to that I will attach one or more attachments. Now, it doesn't matter whether these attachments are PDFs, JPEGs, or TIFF files from scans. The system will just pick up the fact that they are an attachment and allow you then to process it. So I'm just going to send that off with 3 separate attachments off to that email address. That will then be picked up. I'm using, as I say, a separate email address for subcontractors than I use for suppliers. As a result of my action there, you'll see that my count has now jumped up to 4. Even though it was a single email address, it came in as a single entry, but there was 3 attachments on the one email. So if I click on that orange tile now, I'll be taken down to a list showing me the 3 separate additions and an indication as to where they've come from in terms of the sender's email address. If I click onto them, we'll be able to see the content as a preview of each of those individual items. Okay, now what can happen, obviously, is a situation whereby you'll receive an attachment that comes in on that email address, but it's made up of more than one invoice. So as has happened in the case here, we can see on this particular attachment, I've got 2 pages as part of the same attachment. Now, Evolution MX doesn't know that it's not a 2-page invoice, and it might be. So we just need to housekeep, if you like, and step in and do any tidying up that may be required. So in this instance, what I'll do is I'll just call up item number 35, which is just a unique reference the system gives to it. Recognizing that page 1 is for invoice number 124, if I skip through, I'll go to the next page, which is clearly a different invoice number. So what I'll do is I'll go back to page 1 and I'll just hit save. The system will then prompt me to say, do you want to save the subsequent pages as a separate ID number? So I'll just say yes to that. And now I've kind of split up what I need to do as a to-do list. Going back to my summary list, we'll see we've got one extra one because I've split off that earlier conjoined item. So my entries are waiting to be done. So if I just pick up on the first one, let's go and process that. If you do, as a result of this, incidentally, get items that are clearly not an invoice, maybe because they've sent some additional paperwork, or maybe there's a statement or other correspondence, then you do have the option of being able to step into items such as that, mark them as invalid at the top. That means the invoice register is not going to require them to be processed any further. You can do that, and then it'll just mark it as being dormant in the file and archive it. Okay, so I can mark that as invalid, which means it's not going to expect me to process it anymore. It then disappears off my list of things to do. Just as I'm keeping a tab on them, over on the far right, you'll see in the silver grey tile, I've got a count there of those items that I've marked as invalid. And if I want to keep going and checking to see which ones are coming in from the same email address over and over again, then I can maybe take action on that front. Let's go into my processing list. Let's call up the item top of the list now, and we'll be able to process it. So I have set mine, as I say, to be purely looking at subcontractors. If you had a situation where you wanted to share the email address for subbies and suppliers, then what will happen is this creditor type field, the third down from the top on the right there, will be a selectable field, and you can just toggle between subcontractor or supplier. So it's deemed to be all subcontractors on this particular system. So I'm just going to go in and key in some information. So I can use my browse to search on the subcontractor account. This can be your own choice as to how this information is displayed, so you can tailor the fields that are available there for you to select from, and also for searching and sorting. Or what you can nicely do now is you can just start typing. So if you go into type, it'll go into auto search mode for you. Okay, I've got a little yellow triangle there, giving me a nice little subtle warning that there's a problem with insurance. So the public liability insurance details are being checked at point of entry, not stopping me from going any further, just giving me an indication that there may be something you need to look at. The system is built all around subcontractor orders. As you'll know, those of you that already use Evolution M, based around the subcontractor order system. So an order would have to exist before we could go any further. This just allows us to be able to browse on the subcontractor orders that we've got relevant to this particular subby. So I can see them all there, make a selection. Again, this list can be formatted to include this summary information that will help you make the most accurate selection. Okay, so if I call that up, I'm using that. I've got no need to put in a ref1. That would be the barcode number on Evolution M, so we can just bypass that. The system will automatically allocate that for you. If you need to or want to, you can overwrite the dates that are being shown. The invoice date is being assumed to be today, and then the terms are being applied to give you a due date. You'll notice also you've got an ability to specify the period per posting. A bit different from where the Evolution M works, in as much that we don't need to tell it up front that the period is the same for all items in the batch. It can be an invoice by invoice basis where they can be going into different periods. So I'll just use my ref2 to record the supplier's invoice number and then recording the net value. Okay, this is going to be a straightforward item initially anyway. So we're just going to put in the net details, and then if we go down to the bottom and select the show cost allocation, that's going to allow us to indicate which line of the orders does this value relate to. So this would show as many lines as you placed onto the purchase order in the first place. I've got a breakdown of labor and materials. I've also chosen to format this screen so as it makes it easier for the user to know what kind of input they're expected. I've chosen to make in yellow highlight the columns that can allow for some kind of input, whether it's an input of a value or a percentage or a calculation. So it prompts me or directs me towards the area where input is allowed. So I could be saying here at this point that I'm going to put it all against the measured work. So if I just double click on that, I can put in the value associated with that. Okay, it gives me a nice little warning as well, saying that the measured work exceeds the budget. If we look to the left of where we're inputting, we can see the order value is only 1,000. So far, we've well overspent or been charged over and above what was on the order value. And that might be legitimate, but you're getting that warning just to say, beware, it's gone over what you'd expected to have received. Okay, at that point, I've got nothing left to allocate, so I can just submit that, and it will just check on all the balancing entries and post it, in this case, directly to the ledger. So that's now gone on to my subcontractor balance. It's matched against the order. It's now sitting against the subcontract inquiry, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. Okay, taking up on a second item. So let's go to another item here, and let's do something else with this one. So this time, you're seeing the information on the left-hand side again of the screen. We can record as much or as little as we want to on the right-hand side. The beauty of the invoice register is that if you want to just save what you've done so far, you can do so, and you don't lose what you've done. You don't have to commit to it. You've just saved what you've input so far, so that if you were to return to that item number 37, the details that you've so far put in are there, and they can be changed. The fact it's an invoice register means it's not yet committed to anything, so you are able to change it or add to it before you make the... I may not know what the order number is, so I could record the indication of the references that I've got. So I could put in the invoice number and the fact it's 300, but I'm not sure what the order number is. So I may just save that as it is and come back to it and look at it later, or I can involve somebody else to assist me with that particular query. So I'm going to choose the option here to do place on query. This will then bring forward the notes that I put in. that will assist the query handler with dealing with any request I make to them. And I can choose here on the past to user list somebody that I want to get involved in it. I'll just pick myself, but I could be anybody that you've chosen to set up on the system. It doesn't have to be a user of Evolution MX. It just needs to be somebody who potentially could receive nothing more than an email to give them an indication that their help is assisted and required. So I'm just going to pick myself there, and I'll show you the options that you get. So for the time being, item number 37 will disappear from my to-do list because I've asked it to filter that list with only those items that are requiring some kind of action. And that's had action placed upon it, albeit it's an outstanding action elsewhere in the system. So what I've done there is I've chosen to have a pale blue tile query list, which is assisting me and telling me all of those items that I have processed and have been earmarked for somebody else to get involved with. And I can see there that the approval user is KW. So from an admin perspective, you can see a list of all of those that have gone out and who they're with. Now, if KW were a user, and obviously I am a user of the system, then I could access the approval menu and I'd be able to see a to-do list of all of those items that are requiring me logging on, seeing a to-do list and being able to process further, maybe just add a note to the system, take it off query with any notes that I've added so that the admin can then step back in again. Now, even if I were a user of the system, or if I'm not a user of the system, then I could maybe more conveniently rely on email. So separate to Evolution MX and coming through the normal email system, will be something that's been triggered by that query request that I just placed on that invoice. So within the body of the email, you can see I've got the order number question mark, which I keyed in. Attached to the email then will be a copy of the invoice. So no need to access the system to get hold of this. It could be something that you can then have a look at. Maybe you're a casual or an infrequent user of Evolution MX, or maybe not user at all. So you don't necessarily want to be troubled to keep going into the system to see if there's anything requiring approval. So you're getting that independent from the system. If all you choose to do is reply to that, then you can maybe the order number, whatever it might be, send that back. Because it's been dealt with via email, and because I was the sender of that, I then get that response back into my email inbox. So as the administrator, I could be checking my emails, and then I could be going back to the invoicing dashboard, going to my queries list, recognizing now that Ken Weston has provided me with the input required on that particular entry. So I could call it back up and I could take it off query and start filling in the details related to the response I've just received. Okay, now what will happen here is that taking it off query will place it back to the admin function. So it's still within the control of admin to be able to process the result of what's just been requested. So from this point, I can go in and I can select now the order number, finding what it is that I want to place it against. I've already put in the £300 value, so that's all good. I can now just finish off and go through what you saw me do earlier, going into the show cost allocation, okay, and then allocating it against one or both of the lines that's been shown there. So I could say this time I'm going to put 100 against one line and the remaining 200 against the other line. Okay, submit that. That's gone and done the rounds through the query. So it's had the input from others in the organization, and it has now been dealt with as far as Invoice Register is concerned, and submission there has placed it onto the account. Now I could then go and look at the result of my postings through normal Evolution M subcontractor inquiry, or I could make use of some of the dashboard functionalities and alternative reporting that we've got with Evolution MX. So my list here on the bottom left, the large tile, is showing me my subcontractor balances. If I were to click into that, I could then inquire more deeply without having to go through the traditional channels. So this could load up that same report that I've chosen to show in subcontractor order. I could have ranked it in balance order if you wanted to, expand upon that to show the entries that are now featuring against that particular account. We can see the orders that have been placed, the dates, the invoice numbers that the system's now allocated automatically for you. And if you use the paperclip, you'll be able to link to the copies of the documents. So there you've got an indication of the invoice that you saw me process for each of those separate entities. Okay, so that's evidence of there. If you wanted to, as I say, you can look at it through the normal subcontractor inquiry. That will feature exactly as it would do now, with an image now of the document sitting behind it. Okay, what else can we do? So from the invoice register, if I call up my next item, we can involve an alternative way of querying or workflow associated with the processing of invoices. So here on this occasion, let me just go in and post another one against ABC. We've been very busy with ABC roofing today. Select the order number again, it's related in this case. Okay, and again, references. So filling those in and the value. Now, on this occasion, I'm going to request approval on this particular invoice, maybe because I'm not happy with the makeup of it or the value of it or the terms or something else with it. So it needs to have an approval of some description. So I could have a look down at the bottom, go into the workflow route and select whoever I wanted to get involved in workflow. So you can set up on here the authorizers or the approvers that are required to step in and take action. And I'll just pick any Tom, Dick or Harry on this occasion. So let's say it's going to be them. I'll go into the show cost allocation as well. So I do allocate it. So it's ready to be posted as and when, and I'll just put the full value there against that line. Okay, so that's the value being put in. If I now submit that, having indicated that I want workflow to be enabled, then item will disappear off my to-do list. Way of looking at the same entries if I wanted to. So if we show there, item 36 now shows as submitted, subtly different from the previous entries I did, which are showing as posted. And what submitted tells you is it's not yet gone to the ledger. It has been submitted to the workflow that you've asked it to carry out. Okay, and that will give us an indication to show that it's gone through the Dick workflow and the user is actually Ken Weston. So rather than confuse the issue and fire it off to somebody that I couldn't get hold of as a login, I've made it come to myself. So you can say who is going to be the recipient of that action. Now, again, I could have received an email to tell me about that. And I do have the option of being able to respond to that email, and then the approval can be indicated as part of that. But probably more likely, users of this nature will be going in through the approval mechanism, where we can see the value of the invoices is being shown there. I can see its content. Here, as in many other places, you have the option of being able to put sticky notes onto a document. So if I wanted to, at this point, just put an indication on there to say, that's okay, then that sticky note will stay with the image of the document and be visible to everybody who sees it subsequently. Okay, and from here, it's a single entry, so I can approve it. If you've got multiples, then you can tick several of them, and then you can approve them all in one go, having made any additional notes if you wanted to. Okay, if I approve that, put any closing comments on it if you wanted to, say okay. So that's now dealt with it. That will now have similarly gone through to the subcontractor account. Rather than coming back to the admin function. So that's the difference between the query function and the workflow. We're saying that we don't need to see it again if we put it into workflow. It just needs to be rubber stamped or approved and authorized, and then we can be happy that it's going to go off to the ledger. So we've got the same ability to inquire upon that through the subcontractor inquiry we just looked at. There's a newer entry sitting there with the image associated to do with that particular document. And there's my little sticky note that I emblazoned over the top of it. Okay, so that's the workflow, just to show you how that's been set up instantly, because some of you would be interested, I'm sure. I've got workflow stages. So this is configurable. What we're saying here is that the workflow I used was set to a 50 grand limit. So Dick could approve invoices up to the value of 50,000. And that's the user who's going to be involved in the workflow that I've selected from my list of users. Just so you know, if you didn't select a user, then there is, in my case, an automatic fallback approval route. So I've got it set here against a value of quite a large sum. We can't work out, well, it's about 1,000 million or something. We're saying here that this will be the fallback route. So if I don't consciously select somebody on that workflow route, and if the invoice I'm processing is greater than 2,000, it will automatically go through this workflow. So it can be based upon a value, and you'll know that it can't slip through without somebody seeing an approval of it. So you've got the choice of using an enforced fallback and or a selectable workflow, depending on what your choices are. Okay, so that's a invoice register as it affects the subcontractors. Moving just over to the suppliers, just to show you that that is available there as well. I know some of you may have seen this already, so for some of you this will be a recap. Others, it may be seeing it for the first time. So here, because I'm using a separate email address, I've got a separate dashboard and a separate processing list. So it could be a completely different person doing this particular function. So I've got a similar looking dashboard screen, but this is all looking at invoices that come into the suppliers or the purchasing email address. So if I call up on that list, I'll be able to see the entries that have come in this case for Wolseley. Same options as before. If it's multiple pages, we can split it. With Purchase Ledger, you're obviously looking at your suppliers rather than your subcontractors. Same options for searching to be able to select the suppliers. Not as much as a need for purchase ordering to be involved. So it's not insistent upon there being purchase orders. I know a lot of you will get invoices that come in and you either haven't got purchase order module or you're not using it. For things like establishment expenses, utility bills and whatnot. So we don't have to involve purchase orders in the same way as we would have to with the subcontractors. So on this occasion, I could say the gross value, including VAT, make any amendments to any calculated or suggested VAT figures, including also an alteration to the breakdown of the VAT, whether it's a zero rated, reduced rate, or whatever it may be. On this occasion, I'm going to pick up and choose a purchase order number to do, at least in part. I've got a list there of 46 outstanding purchase orders for that supplier. So I might want to use options here I've got to be able to filter. So if I know a purchase order number, I can key it into the column heading, it will go straight to it. So I'll just call up on that purchase order number. What the system will now do is it will look to that purchase order and load all of the lines that are associated with that purchase order, either on the basis of the lines that have only been received, gone through the GRM process, goods delivered, or back to the original purchase order. Again, that's one of those choices you've got as a company to decide, is the default to look back at the original purchase order, irrespective of whether deliveries have happened, or only to look at those that have been marked for delivery? Your choice, really. Similar choices there also for workflow, which can be different for workflow on a supplier invoice. If I go into show cost allocation, the system will have loaded those lines for me. So based upon the purchase order, which was for 5 at 50, 6 at 12 and 1 at 25, I am 53 quid short of the invoice value that I indicated at input. And you can see the difference in the breakdown is being associated there. I can, if I want to, just make a change to the bottom half of the screen here. So rather than having to go back to the purchase order to make any changes, I could just say, right, that price was clearly out of date and it was wrong. So let me just double click. I'm going to override that and allow that to become the price. You may choose to use the query function, throw it off to somebody else. Say, can you just check to make sure that price is okay because it looks like we've been overcharged. You could put it on to the system and put it on hold if you wanted to. So it's your choice as to how you deal with it. But it's saying basically you're allowed to do with it. The system incidentally will put it on hold if it goes over a certain tolerance value. So if you'd said that there has to be a variance of no more than 5% or £5 on the matching, then that can put it into automatic hold onto the ledger. So I've now got somewhere down towards that difference, 35 quid. If we spot the bottom line there, we've got delivery that's been added to the invoice that was omitted from the purchase order. So rather than having to go back to the purchase order again to add the line, I could take the advantage here of just saying add. And this is the option you would use if you had no purchase order. You don't put a purchase order number in, you go into show cost allocation and you'll have an empty screen at the bottom and you can just choose to add the line. In this case, I'm going to add it against a contract, but you don't have to because you may be bypassing that and going directly to nominal. Where I'm specifying a contract and a cost head, obviously it works out the route to nominal from those two, so we don't need to tell it. So I'll just be putting in the amount there and maybe putting in some notes to say what it was for. Now, if you don't like the arrangement I've got on the bottom half of the screen, then you are at liberty to change that. As we saw elsewhere, you can select the columns that you want to have shown. You can alter the sizing. You can now save that as your preferred default, different from what another user on the system may choose to see. And as we saw before, you've got the option of being able to add notes during processing this time. Add it to invoice or missed off purchase order, whatever you want to do. If you are making multiple notes, the system does keep an audit of them and it will know who made which note and give an indication of the user and the date and the time that was done. So here I've got nothing left to allocate. So if I just submit That will tidy up all of the matching against the purchase order, post it through to the ledger. I've not taken to the inquiry function there or the workflow there, but similarly, those could be available to your purchase ledger invoices as well. One additional top-up that you might want to consider with the invoice register is to bypass some of the need to do all of that input that we've just done. It's an option that we've got called OCR. It works on the same basis in terms of the supplier will send you the invoices through the same route. It's just if you've got the OCR top-up within the invoice register, it'll allow you to do less processing. But that doesn't mean to say you have to accept what the system has done. So OCR just stands for optical character recognition. And I'll show you an item that's come in through OCR and what the system has done for me. So same mechanism, comes in through email. Left-hand side of the screen is showing me the invoice. The right-hand side of the screen, though, has been populated for me by the OCR process. So I didn't have to tell it that it's supplier PL001, because what's cleverly happened is the system has looked at the invoice image, it's scanned it, it's found a VAT number, and it's compared that against your supplier database and made a suggestion to you that it's supplier PL001. As I say, it's a suggestion, so you don't have to go with it. If you wanted to amend it, redirect it somewhere else, you've got the ability and the power to step in there. So I don't think it's going to be taking away your jurisdiction in these areas. So I'm happy that it's PL001. Elsewhere, we can see where the system has picked up the required information. So the date can be in a different format. It doesn't have to be pure numerics, as would be the input requirement. You can see it's recognized that as a date format. Other fields, it's found in a similar kind of way. It's kind of intelligent enough to realize where things are. And this is a first stab it's made at giving you suggestions on it. So it's pretty good at doing this, but it will obviously learn from you because you are able to override and redirect it. By using this option at the bottom here, use for training, that's where you can step in and say, okay, that total amount looks okay. The goods value, though, let's say I wanted to use it from this value over here. So you can redirect it with the use for training set on. You're overriding its findings so far, and it's therefore learning from you, and it's building a template as to how to deal in the future with invoices that are for PL001. So it learns from you, and it gets more intelligent as it goes. So you've got the ability to override at that point. If it's provided with a purchase order number, we can direct that to the purchase order awaiting list, if you like. And therefore, when I go into show cost allocation, I've got nothing more to do because the value of the invoice matched the purchase order that was outstanding on the system. Nothing left to allocate, nothing more for me to do then. And I'm just taking the final say in allowing that to be submitted. Now, it's up to you whether you choose for the system to fully complete the posting, or whether you want it, as I'm doing, to be able to step in at the last minute. So up to you. A lot of people feel a bit nervous about letting the system go off and just do it. So we're saying, well, let it do as much as the input as you can. Once you see what it's doing, you'll be much more relaxed and possibly then be able to let it go further and do more of the processing for you, because you know it's going to get it right. It's learned as it's gone along, and you've been able to redirect it. Okay, so that in a nutshell then is the invoice register functionality as it applies to subcontractors and also to the purchase ledger. We've also seen how you've got the option to include, should you wish it, the OCR functionality to more cleverly interact with the receipt of the emails that you get in relation to your invoicing. So I hope you like what you've seen this morning. If you have any questions in relation to what we've covered, then please do let us know, and we'll chase those back up with you on a one-to-one basis. And if you want to see anything more about the invoice register or anything else to do with Evolution MX, then again, please let us know, and we'll be happy to speak to you on a one-to-one basis. But I'd like to thank you very much for your attendance, and say, hope you've enjoyed what you've seen, and wish you a very good day. Thanks very much. Bye now.